Hi everyone. Okay, so this is a follow-on from today's lecture, or week two's lecture, which we will look at, or we have looked at. Forget we're doing this in the future. So we have looked at best practices and optimization and codes, reusability, and things like that. So this is just a little tutorial or a little show and tell of putting some of those things into practice. I have a small 2D scene that I've built in Unity. Remember, we're not doing a 2D project. I've just done this as to build it pretty quickly. And I've attached a couple of scripts to the scene, and I'll show you through those on maybe what I mean by the optimization and using best practices and also reusability. And it might just give you an example there of what we were talking about theoretically in the actual lecture. So let me switch over to the Unity scene. Okay, so here we are with our Unity project, or my Unity project. Open up, and it's just a sample scene. If you want, I can share this with you just so you can have a look at the scripts later, but I'll probably just put it up on Moodle now I've said that, so you won't need to ask me. I was going to say just send me an email, but no, I'll put it up on Moodle so you can share it. And yeah, it's a very basic scene. As you see, 2D thing, my little logo. Let me play it for you, and we don't do much, so the little player here can roll along, hits the spikes, and you might have noticed the expression change to ooh, sort of hit the spikes, happy expression, hit the spikes, ooh. Very simple, but as I say, I think that's enough for just showing you what we need to do here. So let me come out of that. And if we look on the player, what I've set up here is it's just a simple sprite with a rigid body, 2D rigid body, and circle collider just so it rolls along with the sprite renderer and an animator on it. The animator is the thing that changes the expression on the face. So I just have two sprites with different expressions, a smile and the ooh expression, and all I do is when it hits the spikes, when it collides with the spikes, it sends a trigger to change the animation over to the ray sad animation, and it switches out. So that's very simple. But if we look here on the actual script, I have a script called the player scripts altogether. Now I've put it all together because what I'm going to be showing you in this session is how to best separate those down into a couple of different scripts, and why that might work better than not doing so. So we'll open Visual Studio and we'll have a look at this script. So there's nothing much to it. The main player script, I've serialized a couple of fields here for the health and the walk speed, so we can change those on the fly. A couple of references to the animator and the rigid body, and a couple of other references for the current state and is the key left or is the key right being pressed. And I also have on the start function here, main player starting script, just so it reads into the print, reads into the console, just so I know that it's started. We've got the animator is the get component animator, and the RB2D is the rigid body 2D to get that component. A little state machine there, just to set up the new state for the animation play. And here's our input code, just generating if we get the press the code A, it will if it's true, it'll go left. And if we press D, we will roll to the right. Nothing too much there, just the move of the player. This is the actual movement code that links to this. So the move player will just minus the walk speed and to go to the left, and just a plus walk speed to go to the right. Little collision. So if we hit something that has the tag does damage, it'll change the state of that animation to Ray Sad, and if not, then if it'll change the state to Ray Happy if there's no collision. And that's it. Now this is a small script. It's a few lines, but it's not very big. Where this sort of thing would come into is if you have a player script or a player controller script that is getting quite large and you have a lot of elements in it. And believe me, they do build up really quick. So it's better to implement this from, this time, and have these ideas of when you're building these things out, just so when you do progress on to building something a lot bigger, you've already got into this practice and you're sort of following best practices, which obviously is the point of these classes. So if we look at it, we can probably break it up into 3 or 4 different things, different elements. But what I'm going to show you is if we break up the input script, the movement code, and the collision code, then that'll help us keep control of things and build the project to be a bit neater. There's a couple of things that I will go over about, because you're thinking, well, I just create 4 scripts: a player, controller, the collision, the movement, and the input. There's also a thing, sort of a funny thing that Unity doesn't do by default, which we'll go over as well, which you would think it should, but we can set that up, and I'll show you how to set that up as well. Okay, so if I pull up a little diagram I've got here, it's in Miro, but it's a nice little sort of whiteboarding tool that you can create nice little graphics in, and it'll help you with your game design document. So if we look at how we've broke this up, so we've got our player script, which is the larger script, the main script that we are using. And we've got our 3 components of that player script. So we've got the input script, the movement script, and the collision script. And what we want to do is separate these into different components, into different scripts. But we need them all to go through the player script and talk to the player script. So the player script can talk to all 3 of them at once, and all 3 of them can talk to the player script. What we don't want is the input script talking to the movement script, or the collision script talking to the input script, coming back to the player script, talking to the movement script, the movement script talking to the collision script, going to the player script, input script. That's what we want to happen, but we don't want them to talking to each other individually. We want them all to go through the player script. Otherwise we get a terminology, it's called code spaghetti, for obvious reasons. But yeah, it gets quite mixed up and quite confusing, and can cause a lot of lag in a game with the codes or the scripts trying to talk to each other. If everything comes nice and neatly from the input script to the player script, and then that goes down to the movement script, or it can go down to the collision script, then it all is talking to each other nicely, because it's all going through that main script, the one script. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, obviously we need to do that by creating new scripts. So I've already created the new scripts. I went just to save time, so I'm not having to type it out here, but I'll open those. So I've created the player script, which is the main overarching script. Then we've got the movement script, input script, and collision script. Player collision script, player input script, and player movement scripts. Let's open the main script, and not much has changed in here except for I've serialized the fields. I've taken out all the code that wasn't necessary for the input, movement, and collision, but I've serialized them so they can talk to each other. So now I've got those serialized fields and created a link to the other scripts. Let's go back to Unity and open and let's change this script out. So go to our player, and I want to get rid of, where did I put the player scripts? So that was the player altogether script. So if I remove that component, that go on? No. Add component player script. Okay, so now we've added the player script, the new player script, to the player controller. And we've got our serialized boxes, our serialized inputs in here. Let's move that. Let's just add our other components in, the collision, the input, and scroll down, and the movement scripts. And now what we can just do is drag these in. So the movement will go in the movement, player movement, input goes into input, and guess what? Collision goes into collision. So there we go. That's our scripts in. Okay, so let's have a look at each of these scripts. Let's have a go at open the input script. So the first thing you'll notice that I have added to the input script is this link, this serialized field to the player script. We need this so it can talk to each other, so it has access to the parent, if you want to call it that, player script. There might be some reason that we want to have access to a couple of things that are in the player script, like the health or the walk speed, or the animator or the rigid body. I can't, for an input system, maybe not, but you know, there are other examples like on the collisions and things that will need to do that. So let's go back to Unity, and what we now need to do is go into our player, and we need to link this player script into the players, into the fields under the collision, input, and movement, that serialized field. So that's quite simple. We just drag it down, put it in there, do it on all three while we're here. And now those are all three linked up together. So if you now look at the, let's have a look at this movement script. So if you look here in the movement script, there's, you know, the amount of code here is a lot less than it would have, or it was the same amount of code, but it's in its own little script, which, you know, it's nice and neat here. The movement script is basically connects to the player script. So if you see here, if it's checking here, it goes up to the player script, then it goes into the input script, and it checks to see if the right button is pressed, which we have set as the D key on the input script. Where we got that? So we've got left is A and D is right. You know, look at that script. It's nice and neat. It's easy to read. It's easy to have these lines to show me, or to show whoever opens the code, even if it's for yourselves. In, you know, you might come to this in half a year, 3 years, 10 years time, open it, and if you don't have anything there to point out what the bit of code is actually functioning as below, then it can help. It can hurt your development, and you end up having to figure everything out again. And believe me, you do forget, You write so much code over years that it goes and you do forget it. So that links through the player script to the input manager, and that's for moving left and right, just checking your velocity and or not checking your velocity, adding the velocity to the player. And if we look at the collision script, we've got pretty much the same, but on the collision, it's going through the player scripts and it's changing the state of the animation, which is still, I kept the state machine into the player just for ease of access, really, because to say that could have been on its own, or you could have separated that. And if you have a larger state machine, then maybe that's another step that you would take to separate that out. But very minimum sort of code to keep in there. Okay, so let's have a look to see if this actually works now. Now we've changed those scripts around. I'll just show you again, not this one. So now, we've gone through that. You should be able to see that everything goes through the player script. So when that movement script is looking to see, or the input script wants to actually move the object, when the key's pressed, it'll go into the player script, and then the player script will speak to the movement script, and the collision script will speak to the player script to trigger the animation. So let's see if it does work. And if I click play, just to make sure, yeah, I've got the right script open. Click play. Takes a second, and it's working. Yeah, face changes back. Okay, it's still working exactly like it was before. However, you'll see we have an error on the console. Null reference exception, object reference not set for instance, and object player movement script. So there's something going wrong in the movement script, and that's what I wanted to point out to you. That doesn't always happen when you change these things, but it could happen, and I can still play it. But if I was trying to build this out as an executable, if somebody really wanted to play this, it would stop me building it out, or it would potentially stop me building it out. But we don't want to have an error anyway. There is quite an easy fix for it, but it's one of those things that you just need to know where it is and how to fix it. Problem solving in Unity is part of the course, isn't it? But this is one of those things that you'll come across. So say if this didn't stop us playing, but say if there was something that was in the codes earlier on. Let's bring up the code. So all these scripts have a start function. So that obviously means that when you start the game, the code will start running and it'll be looking for all these things. The thing that Unity doesn't do is start them in a certain order. And you would think that going off the hierarchy system in your inspector here would be the obvious way to do it. But Unity doesn't work that way. That's just a GUI for us to obviously see it's working, or it's for us to be able to see it being implemented, but that doesn't it's not how it actually runs through the code. What we need to do is we need to go to edit, project settings, and it's way down the list, not services, the script execution order. So by default, normally that won't be on. When you open your project, it'll probably be set up as it is here. And what we need to do is we need to add all our scripts into this, and we can set it to execute in a certain order. So we've only got the 4 scripts. So we've got the player script, then we've got the input script, movement script, and collision script. And you can see these times, or these numbers here, are the milliseconds on how fast it would fire. What you need to do is make sure that these go one after another. So the second one is delayed or fires slightly after the first one, and then so on and so on. So obviously we want our player script to fire first, and just the way when we've added it, it's put 200, 300, 400. It doesn't matter as long as it's an increment. So I can put 101, 102, and 103, and click apply. You can close that and just clear the console so we can see. Play. There we go. We're not getting any errors, and everything is working as it should. Excellent. And okay, let's go to our camera. Okay, so that's it. That's the end of the little tutorial. As I said, I'll put these files up onto Moodle. And if you have any questions, please, email me, DM me on Discord or Teams, and hopefully I can answer. But we'll look into anything that questions you might have. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks very much. Speak to you next time.